Right now your car is shaking. Maybe it's a low rumble at idle that you feel through the steering wheel. Maybe it's a vibration that rattles the dash every time you sit at a red light. Maybe it builds at highway speed until it feels like the whole cabin is coming apart. You've taken it to a mechanic. You've paid for diagnostics. You've been handed a quote somewhere between $400 and $2,100 and told that your engine mounts are gone, that this is just what happens, that the parts are expensive, that the labor is what it is, and you paid it, or you're about to. What if the entire system that produces that quote was designed not to fix your car, but to make sure you never knew how simple this actually is? Because the fix exists. It costs around $30 in parts, and the automotive service industry has spent decades making sure it never became common knowledge. The villain in this story isn't some shadowy corporation with a boardroom full of executives cackling over your suffering. It's more mundane than that, and in some ways more disturbing. It's a system, a network of dealerships, independent workshops, and parts suppliers that makes its money not from fixing cars efficiently, but from making every repair feel more complex and more expensive than it actually is. Engine mount replacement, billed as a major service job, earns the average mechanic anywhere from $350 to $1,100 per visit, depending on your vehicle. Multiply that across the millions of cars on American and British roads right now that are running on failed or failing mounts, and you begin to understand the scale of what's at stake. Studies on automotive repair pricing have consistently shown that engine mount labor charges are marked up between 200% and 400% above actual time cost. The parts themselves, sold at dealer prices, can run $80 to $200 per mount for a component that in many cases is available through wholesale channels for under $15. Drivers in the US alone spend an estimated $2.3 billion every year on engine mount repairs. Most of that money is not going toward the complexity of the job. It's going toward the assumption that you don't know what they know. But that changes today. By the end of what you're about to watch, you will understand exactly what an engine mount is, exactly why it fails, and exactly how to assess, source, and in many cases, replace your own mount for a total outlay of around $30. You'll understand the one scientific reason why a failed mount causes the specific vibration pattern your car produces, and why that pattern actually makes diagnosis easier than your mechanic wants you to believe. You'll know which tools you actually need, which ones you don't, and where to source the right part without paying dealer markup. And I'll also show you the one mistake that almost every first-time DIYer makes that can actually damage the engine bay if you get it wrong. Stay with me, because that part matters more than anything else in this video. The story of the engine mount is older than most people realize, and the story of how it became one of the most consistently overbilled repairs in the industry goes back further than you might expect. When the first automobile engines were bolted directly to rigid steel frames in the early 1900s, the vibration problem was immediate and severe. Early drivers endured rattling, shaking vehicles because there was no isolation between engine and chassis. Engineers understood by the 1920s that some form of flexible interface was needed, a component that would allow the engine to run while absorbing the rotational and torque forces it generates before those forces reach the passenger cabin. The solution that emerged was elegantly simple. A sandwich of vulcanized rubber bonded between two metal plates, one bolted to the engine block and one to the vehicle subframe. The rubber absorbs vibration through a process called damping. It deforms slightly under force and dissipates that energy as heat, rather than transmitting it to the vehicle body. By the 1940s, this design was standard across virtually all passenger vehicles. By the 1960s, engineers had refined it further, but the core principle remained exactly the same: a rubber cushion between engine and chassis. Here's what the industry quietly understood, and what was never advertised to consumers. Rubber degrades, not through catastrophic failure, not through dramatic events, but through ordinary heat cycling and time. An engine mount in a typical car will begin to show measurable degradation within 5 to 8 years of regular use. As the rubber hardens and cracks, it loses its ability to absorb vibration. The engine's rotational forces begin to transmit directly into the vehicle structure. And this is where it gets interesting, because that degradation is completely predictable, completely detectable, and in most vehicles, completely reversible with a part that costs less than a dinner for two. The automotive service industry understood this by the 1980s. Service interval data from major manufacturers was detailed enough to flag engine mount wear as a routine, scheduled maintenance item, like brake pads or air filters. That classification never made it into public-facing service schedules. The reason is not complicated. A routine $30 maintenance item generates far less revenue than an emergency $800 repair. What I'm about to show you is the part the industry spent decades making sure you'd never find out. Because once you understand what's actually happening inside a failed mount, and how to confirm it in your own driveway in under 3 minutes, The entire leverage mechanics hold over this repair disappears completely. The component is called a motor mount, or engine mount, depending on your market. Same thing. Most vehicles have between 2 and 4 of them. On a typical front-wheel drive vehicle, there are usually 3. One on the driver's side, one on the passenger side, and a torque mount at the bottom or rear that controls fore-aft engine movement during acceleration. On rear-wheel drive vehicles, the layout varies, but the principle is identical. The core structure is a piece of vulcanized rubber, natural or synthetic, bonded under heat and pressure to 2 steel brackets. When the rubber is intact, it acts as a shock absorber for the constant vibration frequencies generated by a running engine. A healthy 4-cylinder engine running at idle generates vibration in the 25 to 50 Hz range. That frequency is almost entirely absorbed by intact rubber mounts before it reaches the chassis. A cracked or collapsed mount transmits that frequency directly into the frame, and you feel it in the steering wheel, the seat, and the floor. The science is that straightforward. Here's what nobody else will tell you. Diagnosing a failed engine mount does not require a diagnostic machine, a lift, or a trained technician. It requires 2 things. Your eyes in about 3 minutes. Park the car on level ground. Open the hood. Have someone sit in the driver's seat. Ask them to put the car in drive with the brake held. Then gently rev the engine to about 1,500 RPM. Watch the engine. A healthy engine on good mounts will barely move, perhaps a millimeter or 2 of total movement. A failed mount will cause the engine to visibly shift, lurch, or rotate. In some cases, you'll see the engine rock toward one side by an inch or more. That visible rock tells you not only that a mount has failed, but which side it's on. If the engine moves toward the driver's side mount is suspect. Toward the passenger side, and you know exactly where to look. This is information that took a mechanic's diagnostic time and a $90 fee to generate, and you just did it in your driveway for free. If you found this useful, take a second and subscribe. Not as a favor, but because the next several videos in this series cover repairs that the service industry marks up even more aggressively than this one. Now here's the practical method. First, confirm your diagnosis visually as described. Then, identify your exact vehicle make, model, year, and engine size. You'll need all 4 to source the correct mount. Do not use the dealer as your first call. Go to a parts retailer. Rock Auto is the most consistently well-priced for U.S. buyers. In the UK, Eurocar Parts or GSF, Car Parts stock most common applications. Search your vehicle and filter for engine mounts or motor mounts. You'll see options ranging from OEM equivalent to budget aftermarket. For most daily drivers, mid-range aftermarket from brands like Anchor, DEA, or Corteco will perform identically to OEM for the life of the vehicle. The price range for most passenger cars sits between $15 and $45 per mount. Order 2 if both sides are original and the car has over 80,000 miles. If one has failed, the other is not far behind. For tools, you will need a hydraulic floor jack, 2 jack stands, a breaker bar, and a socket set. On most vehicles, you will also need a torque wrench, because improper torque on mount bolts is the single most common cause of premature refailure. And the one mistake that turns a 90-minute job into a return trip to the shop. Do not guess torque. Look up the factory specification for your vehicle. It is typically between 40 and 65 foot-pounds, depending on the bolt size. Use the torque wrench. The actual replacement sequence is as follows. Raise the vehicle safely on jack stands. Never work under a car supported only by a floor jack. Locate the failed mount. You will see a top bracket bolted to the engine block and a bottom bracket bolted to the subframe or cradle. Before removing any bolts, position your floor jack under the engine oil pan with a piece of wood between the jack saddle and the pan to protect the metal. You are not lifting the car. You are supporting the engine weight so that when the mount bolts are removed, the engine does not drop. This is the critical step most people skip. Remove the mount bolts from both brackets, typically 2 to 4 bolts depending on design. The old mount will come free. Compare it to the new unit before installation. If the rubber is cracked, compressed, or the metal has separated from the rubber layer, your diagnosis was correct. Install the new mount, hand thread all bolts before torquing any of them, then torque to spec in sequence. Lower the engine weight back onto the mount slowly. Remove the jack. Reinstall any brackets, heat shields, or covers that were moved during access. Lower the car. Start the engine and repeat your visual check. The movement should be gone. Warning: do not reinstall with the engine weight resting on the new mount while you torque the bolts. The rubber will be compressed under load and the bolt angles will be off. Always torque with the engine floating on the jack. This is the single mistake that causes new mounts to fail early, and the reason some people come back and say the repair didn't last. Before wrapping this up, there's one more thing about engine mounts that almost nobody talks about, and it's something that makes this $30 repair even more valuable than it first appears. A failed engine mount doesn't just cause vibration. It accelerates wear on almost everything connected to the engine. When the engine is free to shift and rock under load, It stresses the CV axle boots, the transmission mounts, the radiator hoses, and in some vehicles, the power steering rack. This is why cars with long ignored mount failures so frequently arrive at shops with multiple secondary issues that compound the repair bill. A $30 mount left unaddressed for 18 months becomes a legitimate $400 repair. Not because the mechanic invented the problem, but because the physics of an unsupported engine are genuinely destructive over time. Replacing the mount early doesn't just fix the vibration, it protects the downstream components that a rocking engine would otherwise gradually destroy. Now consider what you've just learned against what the service industry charges for the same outcome. The average total cost for a 2-mount engine mount replacement at a dealership or independent shop in the US runs between $550 and $1,100. The same job at home, including both mounts and the basic tools if you don't already own them, runs between $80 and $150 total. And the tools are yours permanently for the next job. That is a cost reduction of between 80% and 90%, but the real number isn't the dollar figure, it's the pattern. Because the engine mount is not an isolated case. The same structure, a straightforward repair inflated by assumed ignorance, applies to dozens of common vehicle maintenance items. Oxygen sensors, sway bar links, wheel bearings on certain platforms, throttle body cleaning. The service industry does not survive on complex jobs. It survives on the gap between what you know and what they know. That gap has been deliberately maintained, and the engine mount is one of the clearest examples. Think about the last time you sat in a waiting room at a shop, handed over your keys, and waited for a number that somehow always seemed higher than it should be. Think about the language. We found some additional concerns while we were in there. The language exists because the system depends on your uncertainty. Every repair you learn to assess, diagnose, and in many cases complete yourself removes another foothold that system has in your wallet. The engine mount is one of the simplest entry points into that process, which is exactly why it generates so much revenue for shops, and exactly why the straightforward solution has never been clearly explained to the people who needed it most. Here is what you now know that you didn't know before this video. You know how to diagnose a failed engine mount in your own driveway. You know how to source the correct part for under $30. You know the exact sequence to replace it safely and the one torque step that determines whether the repair lasts. And you know that the vibration your car produces from a failed mount is not a symptom of complexity. It's a symptom of degraded rubber. And degraded rubber is one of the cheapest materials in automotive parts. But here is what this video didn't cover, and what may already be happening in your car right now. Engine mounts are the most visible failure point in a larger system of vibration isolation components that most vehicle owners have never heard of. There's a second category of mount, smaller, less discussed, and in many vehicles more critical, that fails silently, produces almost no external symptoms, and by the time it's diagnosed has already caused damage to a component that costs 10 times more to replace than the mount itself. That component is not the transmission mount. It's something most mechanics won't mention in an initial inspection because flagging it early would reduce the total repair bill, not increase it. That story is for the next video, and if the engine mount is the chapter you just read, what comes next is the chapter they've been the most careful to keep closed